A major question on the mind of nearly every firm in the defence industry is, what will the next generation of the industry look like? And largely what the answer to that question comes down to is another huge question. Can the incoming defence firms, the disruptors, beat the established firms? Now everyone is super divided on this. People who perhaps aren't familiar with the sort of community don't realise how passionate people get about this sort of argument. Some say you can't resist progress. This is what happens when new firms come in. They innovate better, more efficiently. And the others say, the bastions of defence has stood as long as I can remember, as long as my father can remember, and as long as my grandfather can remember, and my grandchildren will say precisely the same thing. But it's not cut and dry. No, by no means is this settled yet. And we'll have to see what happens really within the next 50-odd years. But there is no certain outcome here. So I think it's interesting to discuss. And obviously, as ever, I can't really do it justice in such a short form. So what do I mean when I talk about this debate? For background, for context, recently, a new type of defence firm has been emerging. This is the New Age firm, a firm like Anduril, which enters the market with technology that might be perceived as disruptive. This firm grows quickly, and so let's talk about Anduril, because actually it's probably a pretty shining example of what this sort of New Age firm looks like. It's not yet a household name, but everyone in the defence industry seems to know it. It was founded in 2017, and by selling to governments in a manner that the governments and Anduril claim to be sleek, effective, and innovative systems, and going against the grain of bureaucracy that the larger firms have, the sort of establishment that generally takes place for these larger contracts. The sort of issues that I've talked about in this video that is what they claim to be fixing. They are perceived to be streamlining defence in the face of, this bureaucracy, good or bad. Anduril specifically, despite being only founded 5 years ago, is estimated to already have grown to about £6.6 billion in market cap, bringing it to near £1 billion, it's sort of £1 billion contracts, in an industry which is notorious for being rather lumbering, rather lethargic. And many firms see Anduril as injecting new life, as going against the status quo, that defence firms need to be big in order to operate well. Now, this of course is very impressive, and one looks at firms, the firms I'm more familiar with perhaps, BAE Systems, Babcock, Leonardo, Raytheon, Lockheed, Honeywell, all of these giant defence firms with very much more established names stick to the older model. And the question we have to ask is whether that older model is a prerequisite for a functioning defence firm. Can it work on a larger scale in another format? Apologies. Now, a lot of people are saying that this disruption is nothing new, that we've seen smaller, more agile firms like perhaps Apple back in the day, Facebook, Amazon, Tesla, SpaceX. SpaceX is a good example, as is Tesla, because it's a similar emerging concept, pushing more bureaucratic firms out of the market, trying to effectively challenge the status quo and utilising really, really clever hype marketing. And the newer firms really are being compared to these disruptors, the firms that have emerged really within my lifetime, having pushed the well-established firms from their de facto position of superiority, and really throwing up into the air the concept that firms within certain industries are too big to fail, and it appears that this new trend has come for the defence industry. The media, specifically the defence media, talk about the New Age firms as if they're David come to slay Goliath. I perhaps wouldn't trump it up that much, but I don't see that as the case. I do think that there will be disruption caused within the industry, and it's something we've got to keep our eye on, and it's something that these larger firms have to also keep their eye on. So where is the appeal, and what is the appeal of these smaller firms, of these new age tech firms entering the defence market? If larger firms can provide things en masse, if they have longer, better, stronger government relations, and better funding to help develop brilliant products, it would seem that governments have all they want with these larger defence firms. But the smaller defence firms, the new age ones, are really intelligent. call it superficial, but there are very few people who deal with defense that don't appreciate the coolness of a product. I talk about perhaps not focusing so much on the explosion, but you can't ignore the explosion either. The sheer awe that these products can create, that functions in a different manner to the more corporate perceptions of firms like BAE, Raytheon, Lockheed. Even I'll admit, I went onto Anduril's website and YouTube page to see what they had to offer, and it's something that one can really get excited about. It enthralls you. While Anduril, which is pretty much what I'm going to use as the stereotypical example, but there are others, Mars, for example, it's a pretty stereotypical example of this new age tech firm entering defense. Anduril claims that a lot of talent in the defense industry of good engineers is wasted on marketing. Yet their marketing is so brilliant. And that's a key of these disruptor firms. They get excited and they get people excited about potentiality. It's really comparable to the way Tesla or SpaceX advertise in a similar way through hype marketing. You see Tesla's doing incredible things. You see SpaceX launching cars into space. You see the test flights, which are really visually spectacular. And it's interesting, because one would have to have thought that the world public sector interaction, filled with cost analysis spreadsheets, supply chain management proposals and presentations, the sort of hype marketing that is being used by firms like Anduril, can actually do really well, because it creates public and personal perception that smaller firms, these new age firms, are pushing forward innovation. And it also promotes the brand publicly, which builds reputation really, really quickly. And that is what the new age firm wants in disrupting the market. They've got a pretty good tactic. In short, there's a degree to which the future of defense as a market is in the eyes of the awe of the public. It's the same reason that MBDA shows brimstone tests on YouTube, but it's done in probably a more effective manner, because they understand the mechanisms behind it. Anduril, for example, utilizes these mechanisms probably out of Silicon Valley. It's founded by Palmer Luckey, the gentleman who invented Oculus Rift, and he brings a lot of the Silicon Valley mentality to the development of military technology. And it's pretty central to his business. The real creme de la creme product that Anduril makes is called Lattice OS. And it's amazing. It allows full capability of forces in a virtual environment. It uses VR to view the battlefield, the assets on it, to interact with them, to order these assets, to engage threats, to conduct ISR. It's designed to bring about autonomy to all missions. And I'll leave a link, but it's pretty incredible stuff. And all of this, of course, is compatible, if not complementary, to the hardware that they create. Stuff like portable radar units, command and control centers, which are also portable, silent UAVs, drone neutralizing drones, interceptors, electronic warfare infrastructure, underwater systems that focus on maximizing the unmanned element. And of course, all of these systems are really designed around a lot of the hype that you see Silicon Valley companies playing on. So there's several products, for example. One is named the Tactical Intelligence Targeting Access Node, or Titan, or the Mobile Edge Node Agile Combat Emplace, Menace. And it's this sort of marketing. It's not exactly new, but it's done in a manner which inspires awe. And it's not to be underestimated. One of the core aims of these new age firms is the creation of brilliant new sort of interfaces for the warfighter, and understanding how to make these interfaces and systems look simplified and advanced. And they can do precisely the same thing with their business and with their product displays. Now, there is a certain appeal to this sort of product, but a few questions arise. First is, can these new age firms handle operating at a larger scale, something that these entrenched firms have become expert at, have become accustomed to? Second, can they deal with the orders that the government puts in with due regard? Can they control supply chains? Can they think about the technology and maintain this sort of innovation level? Because that's difficult to actually understand. Will they hold to this sort of strategy, or will they turn into large bureaucratic entities themselves if they get into that position? Also, I think there is a conception around these larger firms that, despite their incredible logistical feats, they're slow, they're expensive, they're too conservative. So there is appeal in price as well as logistical value beyond the value of the product itself to the military it's being supplied to. And before someone quotes a figure on how much a specific drone system costs, which isn't very much for these new age firms, I'll say that this isn't necessarily the case, because it's a contract proposal for a set amount of money. There is no negotiation for more, merely the seizing of a contract amount. But it does call into question, if you're building, these sort of toys, will governments effectively make allowances for acquisition? And will there be more promotion of things which are perhaps more trial, not designed to be integrated, but designed to be trialed and tested? All in all, this forces firms to be economical in dealing with the public sector overall, but it raises the question again, do these smaller firms run at a loss? Is it as efficient, as polished as these larger firms' acts are? Entrepreneurs around the world are faced with obstacles in growth because they assume that economies of scale will be able to be seized. And yet, in order for these economies of scale to be taken advantage of, firms have to operate in a practical sense. And that requires logistics, something these new age firms might not be able to deliver on, certainly don't have the experience in delivering on. I talked before about how realistically, no one other than BAE Systems can produce a submarine in the UK. Could these firms ever outcompete the giants on that sort of stuff, given that similar feats have been achieved by small firms in the past? In short, I think firms like this, the new age firms, they have their place. But it's near impossible that they'll be building submarines, warships, battle tanks anytime soon, because they don't have the sheer size, the resources, the logistical capacity, and the government relationship to make it work. What they may do, however, is disrupt in other ways. They'll continue to take big contracts, I think, like the one they got for anti-drone capability and surveillance. 10-year service around it was worth around £830 million that was in the US for border security, something along those lines. And this may increase as time goes on. They have a specific niche. There are certain areas of innovation in which their approach is rewarded. So to stick with the example of Anduril, they've done a load of this border security work. They can build up a range of products in drone, in radar, that sort of stuff. And all of their systems are compatible, so it complements each other and promotes the use of more systems by that firm. And these smaller firms generally focus on one or a combination of three things. It's either full battle space situational awareness in some form, the development of operating systems, or munitions complements, as it were, so infrastructure like missile rails. Generally, the stuff you'd see as characteristic of them developing may be profitable for them in the future, certainly. That's drone technology for land, sea and air, systems with solutions compatibility really, specific munitions, generally smaller sized ones, loitering, that sort of stuff. And there is a general trend towards that which will increase the size of the market. Perhaps satellite data link, mission orientation, electronic warfare systems, and ironically, of course, all of this is something we're moving further towards in regard to the defence industry and its trends over the past 10 years and the next 10 years. I don't know whether it will turn out to be true, but smaller firms are claiming that they can achieve excellent economies of scale and battle the big firms on logistics, and with the larger contracts being won, that may be the case. A major question to be asking, in my view, and I've asked a lot of them, is this issue with mentality? Is it culture? The smaller firms focus on minimization of bureaucracy, which makes them agile, and something overlooked is that they're focusing on innovation in a traditional sense. Palmer described it as something like this. Smaller firms are making what they believe to be valuable, even if the government isn't willing to buy it yet. They're willing to deliver value to the defence marketplace with the goods and services that it needs, whereas larger firms ask governments to pay them in order to see if their idea is valuable and viable. And if it is, they'll bill them for every stage of the process that it takes to turn that idea into reality. And if, of course, it's not, they'll pay these firms until it is viable. Now, it's difficult not to see this as legitimate disruption. It's difficult not to see this as something which will be more viable potentially in the future. But now, of course, they can't build stuff like nuclear submarines just because it might be valuable. So it limits what they can develop, what they can innovate in, which they are good at, to a very specific market. The sort of mentality they talk about is achievable for smaller projects, and really those smaller projects only. With an ever-growing base of investors, collaborators, these small firms might be able to develop sort of some larger project, create systems which are more intensive, and that will only increase as sponsors and collaborators become bigger. But I don't think they'll ever be building warships. Unless, of course, and this calls another question into question, what could the firms achieve, these new age firms, as well as the larger, more, the bastions of defense? What could they achieve if these smaller firms and the bastions collaborated? It might be the best of both worlds in regard to efficiency, innovation, funding, relationship to government, facilities, large infrastructure. Who knows? But that might be something that's potential in the future. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. It could be collaborative. Now, I'm of the opinion that, given I'm part of the general public, I can't know how well larger firms are dealing with this. I know that, I've talked to people and I know that they're making efforts, but I can't say the degree to which it's working. I also can't know whether smaller technology firms and the technology they develop is any good beyond the superficial. Of course it looks good, of course there's brilliant hype media around it, but it's not battle tested. So one can't know, but I can say about this technology, about these systems, is that it will have an impact because it's a new form of perceived information. One that, despite their best efforts, the larger firms haven't caught up to yet. And it's only a matter of time before these new age firms try to compete in the non-product markets. Stuff like logistics, stuff, I guess you could say, like finance availability. So it's potentially, in the works. And if those sort of firms, all new age firms, were to collaborate with each other, then the larger firms might have a problem. At this point, I think it's pretty unthinkable that the bastions of the defense industry might not be there. Someone I was talking to referred to them as the Titans. And because, like the Titans, this gentleman believed that they would fall into disruption based upon the bastions of big business that fell before them. All in all, the more smaller, more agile, new age firms, they can't do everything that our beloved big firms can. But they can disrupt, and they can take a real share of the market, particularly in certain contract areas. They might not have bureaucratic efficiency like larger firms, or an aspect thereof, but they definitely have something to compete on in some areas. And these smaller firms will focus all their energy into doing so, into competing and to developing specific systems. And of course they have that focus, meaning that they can perhaps outcompete. So in short, I am of the opinion that we will certainly be seeing a surge in the prevalence of these firms, because as things stand, they do have perceived value. Even I'll admit they're pretty cool to watch, and a really sort of motivated vision in the future of military strategy and how everything will work. Now they're willing to make things and be less risk averse, meaning they can grow quickly because they're so efficient. Yet larger firms are only the real option. They're the only real option for large, expensive infrastructure projects. And while those projects generally aren't as high margin, they certainly are high capitalization, and a lot more that requires logistics. Also, for more conventional systems that perhaps evolve rather than revolt, defense firms, the large defense firms, will continue to sort of plod away on that, and that is what they're very good at, evolving certain systems to make them compatible to the new age, and making stuff which is effective within our current theatre of war, and actually envisioning what we will see next. Classical munitions with brilliant capability. The larger firms are a safe bet because they have such experience, such great government connection. They have brilliant ability to organise logistically. I'll be doing another video on how these large firms can combat encroachment by smaller firms, but all I'd say at this point is, whichever side you're on, whether you're for the new age firms or for the bastions, this is no time for complacency among any firm. It's an interesting time to look at the market.